Welcome to Bible Study. Glad that you're back with us for another morning as we continue on our journey through the book of Mark. If you are just dropping in or just joining us, great to have you here this morning, or even if you're dropping in and watching at another time that isn't live, still glad to have you here as well. Today we are in Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 29. And unlike my usual practice this morning, we're going to just go ahead and handle the entirety of that passage. So this is a bit out of the ordinary for us because I'm not going to skip around, and we'll see if I can keep this in 20 minutes or less. Maybe we'll actually see a miracle performed here this morning. But either way, so glad for the time and energy that you put, not into watching these Bible studies, but the time and energy that you actually put into your spiritual growth, your spiritual development. The Bible promises that any effort that you put into your spiritual health will have a return on investment. That's a pretty incredible promise made by God to you. So none of this time is wasted. Today's Bible study is brought to you thanks to the generosity of those who are a part of Christ's Table today. And if you would like to join the movement or be a part of what God is doing there, go ahead and visit that website at some point, take a look, and join up with us as we follow God into an incredible season of new things in front of us. See people signing on live this morning. So glad to have you here. Also see the trash truck pulling through back here behind me. So why don't we go ahead and jump into Mark chapter 9, verse 14. So again, we're following Jesus. We've just now followed him down off the Mount of Transfiguration, a high water mark in the spiritual temperature of what's gone on in the book of Mark. Perhaps one of the most important moments that we've seen anywhere in our reading so far, and maybe one of the most important moments anywhere in the Gospels, period. The Transfiguration probably rivals the resurrection in importance, because without the Transfiguration, without Jesus being who he is, the death and the burial essentially means nothing. And so we can kind of see those two things as being important bookends and important signs as to who Jesus is, and authenticating miracles that prove he wasn't a crazy man or just a healer. He was God. So when you come down from a mountaintop experience, it can be a little difficult to get back into the normal routines of life. And we're going to see that with the disciples here, where they get, as my grandfather would have said, a little too big for their britches. It may well be that after the Transfiguration, they thought that they were gods as well, at least Peter, James, and John, who were there. So when they returned to the other disciples, this is Jesus and Peter and James and John having returned from Mount Tabor, they saw a large crowd surrounding the disciples. Now, whenever you show up somewhere and you see a large crowd gathered in a place where you're not expecting it, that can go one of two ways. It can be a really good thing, that something positive is going on, but oftentimes it means that something bad is going on, right? Why is there a large crowd gathered? There is something wrong. What's happened that I don't know about? And so there's this moment where we're not sure where the story is going to go next. And some of the teachers of the religious law, where they're arguing with them. So, same story, different day. The teachers of the religious law have cornered a few of Jesus' disciples without Jesus being around, and probably are trying to take them on their own, arguing with them, trying to perhaps prove their charges of blasphemy against Jesus. And so the story is very quickly continuing to go down. So when the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe and ran to greet him. It may have been just because it was Jesus, or it may have been that Jesus and the three, Peter, James, and John, had still a bit of that, as the Old Testament refers to it, Shekinah glory of God, that they were glowing, or that you could see a bit of the remnants of their time on the mount spent with God still with them. But for whatever reason, there was some awe, either because they were starstruck or because there was something physical that betrayed the fact that they had just been with God. And so they bring Jesus into the conversation, and Jesus says, what is all of this arguing about? Same story, different day. You can almost hear in Jesus' voice the frustration over here we go again. And one of the things that I always want to encourage you to do as you read these stories is so oftentimes we over spiritualize these stories where we end up not really reading it through the lens of these being real people and real events that took place in a real time and in a real place. And so I think it's always important for us to kind of see this through the lens as much as is possible of reality. And so I think it's always important that we try to pull these stories down out of their over spiritualized context in the Bible and do whatever we can to interact with them in a way that makes them real events that come alive to us. So one man in the crowd speaks up and just kind of ignoring all of the arguing that's going on, or maybe the arguing was over this issue, says, "Teacher, I brought my son so you could heal him. He's possessed by an evil spirit that won't let him talk." Now, I want you to imagine this father who is bringing his son to Jesus because he's possessed by an evil spirit. Hospitals, doctors, not really a thing back then. There was little to no hope for someone who had a very serious illness or someone who had something that was in the nature of either demon possession or something that presented in a way that they called or perceived it to be demon oppression. And so imagine, those moments with your children where you're helpless, where there's absolutely nothing that you can do, and you are fully at the mercy of other people, the doctors, the hospital. But imagine there are no doctors or hospital in the way that we understand them. And so your child and the outcome is fully at the mercy of hope and not much else. And so this is a situation that it's hard for us to understand in modern days how defeating, how debilitating, how frustrating, how hopeless situations like these were. So this man brings his child to Jesus for a healing, but instead what he gets is an argument. Fortunately, Jesus listens, sets the argument aside, and allows the man to explain what's going on with his child, an evil spirit that won't let him talk. And whenever this spirit seizes him, the man says, it throws him violently to the ground. Then he foams at the mouth, grinds his teeth, and becomes rigid. So, and remember, Jesus isn't there. There are now just simply 9 apostles who had been left behind, who weren't with Jesus for a day or so up on Mount Tabor. So the man says, I asked your disciples to cast out the evil spirit, but they couldn't do it. You can hear probably the frustration in the man's voice, because there was an expectation if he asked that they would be able to do it. And there must have been some sense that they could do it, that they took on the task of being able to cast out the evil spirit. But it seems as though they were unable to cast out the evil spirit. And so at this point, I'm kind of looking around the crowd in my mind, and you can kind of see those other disciples, backing away a little bit, perhaps, hiding behind Peter or James or John. Maybe they're kind of covering their mouth or their face, anything to not bring any more attention from Jesus or from others on themselves because of this for lack of a better word, failure. So Jesus says to all of them, and here it comes, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." Now, again, we want to drag this down out of the uber religious reading of the text and read this through the lens of Jesus, whom has already said his disciples should be able to do as great of things as he can do, whom have been sent out in the past to cast out demons and heal people. And so there is a likelihood that they've already dabbled and perhaps even accomplished some miracles like this. And so it isn't seemingly unreasonable at this point to expect that they would have been able to handle this situation. In fact, because of Jesus' response, we can assume that there was an assumption from Jesus, at least, that this wasn't beyond their abilities to accomplish. And so the man says, "I tried your disciples, but they were unable to do it." To which Jesus, "Oh, you faithless people, seriously, how long must I be with you?" And if they were already feeling about this tall up until this point for their failure, now they're feeling about this tall, because now Jesus is like, "Seriously, come on, how long must I put up with you?" And they're like, their eyes are getting this big, and they're like, you can almost hear the frustration in Jesus' voice. He's like, "Oh, bring the boy to me. Fine, bring him here. Do I have to do everything myself?" And I hear, me saying this to my kids. I hear, my parents saying it to me. "Do I have to do everything myself? No one can do anything around here but me. Why do I have to do everything all on my own? Come on, can I not get just a little bit of help here? Bring the boy to me." Now, this isn't about cleaning the house or your room. This is about spiritual health and physical health, but this is something that they should have been able to accomplish. And so they bring Jesus the boy. When the evil spirit sees Jesus, it throws the child into a violent convulsion, and he fell to the ground writhing and foaming in the mouth. And so this confirms the father's story. There's something going on here. Jesus asks, "So how long has this been happening?" He replied, "Since he was a little boy." Tragic. Can you imagine dealing with this and there being no hope, no hope at all, until you hear about this rabbi named Jesus, who is being told is fixing things like this. The boy's father goes on and says, since he was a little boy, it's even worse than you're seeing here. The spirit, verse 22, often throws him into the fire or into the water, trying to kill him. Please have mercy on us. Please help us if you can. If you can. Such an interesting statement there. Is it humility? Is it lack of hope? Is it just that he's been so beat down by other people who have said that they could help but weren't able to? Maybe it's all of those, or maybe it's open-ended so that we can insert our own questions and qualms in there. What do you mean, if I can? Jesus says, anything is possible if a person believes. Well, maybe the Father said it because the other disciples, they thought that they could do it and they couldn't. And so maybe he says, if you can, because he's just seen an example of people who should have been able to solve this, who thought that they could fix this problem, and then ultimately were unable to do it. What do you mean, if I can? Jesus asks. Anything is possible if a person believes. And now the disciples have essentially been slapped in the face twice by Jesus. They've been slapped in the face first because they weren't able to do it. And Jesus says, how long am I going to have to put up with these people? But then now they've kind of been whopped a second time in the face by hearing anything is possible if a person believes, thus implying strongly, or at least even directly stating, that the disciples simply didn't believe. And so that is the reason why they weren't able to perform this miracle that they should have been able to perform. So the Father instantly cries out, but I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. I don't think Jesus was talking to or about the Father or his unbelief at all. Clearly, the Father believed because he brought the kid to the disciples and he brought the kid to Jesus. And so he believed that there was some chance. And Jesus said, if you even have this much faith, then mountains can be moved. Well, it's clear that the Father has at least that much faith because he simply showed up. So when Jesus saw that the crowd of onlookers was growing, essentially he's like, all right, let's just, this isn't a sideshow. So he rebukes the evil spirit. Listen, you spirit that makes this boy unable to hear and speak. Jesus says, I command you to come out of this child and to never enter him again. Then the spirit screams, throws the boy into another violent convulsion, and leaves him, and the boy appears to be dead. Great. Now you've killed my son. I mean, in this moment, as a father, you're not breathing. Like your whole world is now here. I brought my boy to have the evil spirit removed because I thought that the spirit was going to kill him by throwing him into the water or into fire. And now Jesus has killed him. So a murmur rumbles through the crowd that says he's dead, as this boy is now laying there. But Jesus takes him by the hand, helps him to his feet, and he stood up. I mean, dramatic. And you've got to feel this as though you're a crowd and onlooker. You know, our problem is here that we have read so many stories like this one after the other that we kind of think, yeah, sure, seriously, you thought he was dead? Of course Jesus wasn't going to leave him there dead. You're an idiot. But you've got to see it through the first century lens. You've got to actually be here with the crowd who doesn't see this every day, who doesn't understand who Jesus is or what's going on here. And every time they see this, it's both unexpected and absolutely terrifying in a lot of ways to them. But that's not the end of the story. Afterward, when Jesus was alone in the house with his disciples, they asked him, why couldn't we cast out that evil spirit? Which really takes a lot of bravery and courage to risk asking Jesus to answer that question, because they knew if they asked it and he answered it, the answer probably wasn't going to want to be one that they wanted to hear, but one that they needed to hear. A lot of times we don't grow in our faith because we're not willing to ask Jesus questions, or we're not willing to go to where we need to go because we know probably what the answer is going to be. It takes courage. It takes risk for us to put ourselves in a place where we have to admit to others, to God, and maybe most importantly to ourselves, that we don't have it all together, that we have some room to grow, that we made a mistake, that something went wrong and it probably was our fault, but we want to fix it so it doesn't happen again. So this is what's going on here with the disciples. Why couldn't we cast out that evil spirit? And Jesus replies, well, this is the kind that can be cast out only by prayer. And usually I just run right on through that. Oh, okay, well. But that's a very interesting answer. And so I've been thinking about that as we've been going through these last few days and weeks in Mark. I've been thinking about where we've been and trying to reconcile that line that Jesus says, with the rest of what we've seen in Mark, and why does it stand out to me as being odd, and how do I make it make sense? Because I don't want to just race right through that, because the fact that they asked the question and the fact that Jesus actually answered the question, which is kind of rare. Usually Jesus just poses another question rather than giving a direct answer. This is a direct answer, which means it's important. And the fact that Mark even thought, I need to tack this onto this story to give some context. And I just, okay, so two things come to mind here, and this is the first one. And if you've been along for the ride for the last week or two, you've seen this statement, so I want to put it up here again. You must do what you can't do with power that you don't have. We continue to see this over and again in the book of Mark, that Mark seems to be seeing Jesus' ministry, and especially Jesus' ministry and work in the 12, the disciples, through this lens, that he's consistently telling them that you have to do things that in your power you can't do, by accessing power that you don't have, God's power. You know, on your own, you can't multiply bread and fish. On your own, you can't cast out evil spirits. On your own, let's just bring that down a little bit to things that to us seem simpler. On your own, you can't live a holy life. On your own, you can't make the choice between the right thing and the wrong thing, and do the right thing. On your own, you can't love your enemy. On your own, you can't do good to people who despise you and treat you badly. And so in order for you to live the Christian life, in order for you to be a follower of Jesus Christ, well, you just can't. You just can't on your own power. Yeah, you can't bring a person who's dead back to life on your own power, but you can't even love the way God expects you to love on your own power. You can't even like people the way God expects you to like people on your own power. You can't choose consistently the right thing when given the choice between right and wrong on your own power without God's power. So if you're going to follow Jesus, there are things that you must do. And you can't do those things with your own power. You've got to access power that you don't have. And this is why I think Jesus kind of blows his top and says, how long are you going to make me put up with these people? How long must I keep doing this? It wasn't about the fact that they couldn't cast out this evil spirit. It was the fact that they simply just weren't getting this idea that they have to do things that they can't do with power that they don't have. And in some ways, I think Jesus really is saying here and in other instances that, you know, casting out demons, multiplying loaves, doing all of these miracles, like bringing people back from the dead, these are actually easier than loving your enemy, than doing good to those who hate you. And so I don't want you to think that this idea of using God's power to do things that you have to do as a follower of him, that's a requirement for you to do, is any easier for you than it is for the disciples. I think that whole love your enemy thing is harder than bringing someone back from the dead, because it's bringing you back from death. It's resurrecting God in you. And so this prayer thing, I think, ties into that. This kind of demon can only be removed through prayer. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's through prayer, essentially, that we admit our need for God and access his power to help. And so whenever the disciples were trying to cast out this demon on their own, they were doing it of their own power. I can do this. This is something that I can do. I can cast this demon out. It's within my power to do that. I can love my enemy. It's within my power to do that. I can make the right choice. It's within my power to do that. I can do good to those who dislike me. It's within my power to do that. And you're going to fail each and every time if it's within your power. And so did the disciples on casting out the demon. And so do you and I often on loving others. And so this kind of demon can only be cast out through prayer. Maybe all of the things that God wants us to do and needs us to do that we can't do on our own can only be done through prayer. Maybe it's just not that kind of demon. Maybe it's every kind of demon that besets us, that controls us, that can only be handled through prayer. Because through prayer, we openly admit that we're not enough, that we have a need of power that's outside of ourselves, of God. And prayer is the pathway that we use to access that power of help. So prayer. At the end of the day, Jesus leaves us and the disciples with a commentary not on removing demons, but on prayer. And prayer being the tool that allows us to do what we can't do through power that we don't have. It's been good to be with you this morning. Looking forward to being back with you tomorrow. Brought to you by ChristTable.today. Check us out. But until tomorrow,